This is TPG Live, and I'm Jeremy Horn, also known as the Product Guy, and we are about to begin. This is your stage, no matter where you are in your product journey, from startups to Fortune 500s, interns to CEOs. We're a global community that values every voice. TPG Live is a show where everyone, both on and off camera, is encouraged to join in and shape the conversation with your insights, your questions, your topics. Today, the on-camera portion of our roundtable is joined by Patricia Raufer, an innovation strategy executive and educator who's led foundational transformation initiatives across many diverse industries. She serves as an adjunct professor for systems thinking and sustainability at Jefferson University. And with an MBA from the University of Southern California, Patricia can currently be found in the consulting practice Patrician Design Solutions, focused on strategic business design, commercialization, and transformation. Next up, we have Chris Butler. Chris Butler, a chaotic good product manager who is currently working at GitHub as staff product manager, focusing on AI and productivity. He speaks frequently on product management at various conferences around the world and previously worked at such well-known organizations as Microsoft, Waze, Kayak, Facebook, Cognizant, and Google. In his spare time, this co-founder of the Uncertainty Project can be found working on the Employee Manual of the Future, as well as with student groups interested in product management. Today on TPG Live, we'll be talking about systems thinking and product operations. How does systems thinking challenge the traditional siloed approach to product development? Should more companies be tapping into product ops to facilitate better decision-making? All this and much more coming up next on TPG Live, your go-to platform for all things product management, connecting you with industry leaders, trendsetters, and a global community of insights and unique perspectives. This is the Product Way. Well, hello, everybody. Hello. It's been a little while since we've done one of these TPG Lives. And today we are joined by Chris and Patricia. So before we get started, I just introduced everyone. Is there anything, Chris or Patricia, you'd like to add that I didn't cover?
No, you got it covered. Thank you.
Awesome.
I mean, you only talked about like 3 or 4 of my side projects. I can spend time later talking about the rest of them. So.
I know, and you've got some really great ones there. So I always like to kind of kick off TPG Live with a question of the night. And so the question of the night tonight is, what fictional character would be a great product manager? So and once again for everyone, the question of the night is, what fictional character would make for a great product manager? So for that, let me toss to you first, Patricia.
So I think Indiana Jones. So the reason being, he has goals and he gets to it, right? So he finds whatever the holy grail is or whatever. He often finds himself in kind of crazy situations, but he has the resourcefulness to figure things out. He's good at risk assessment. So he looks at what's going on. How are you going to make a change? And he's got great leadership skills. So he gets other people enrolled and engaged to do what he is trying to do with his goal. He's able to articulate it, sometimes in action, sometimes in being convincing. But at the end of the day, I think he's a great product manager.
Wow. Okay. All right. Very awesome. Very awesome. Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say like Indiana Jones. He also has like a code.
No,
I think that
no.
I'm agreeing. I'm going to say yes, and let's take, let's go the direction of like Han Solo, because I think Han Solo is one of those people that kind of like, sometimes goes below the level of the kind of the way the systems work to be able to get things done. And so I think just riffing on that, I think Han Solo would be a really great product manager as well.
Oh geez. So the reason I'm giggling and laughing over here is I spent some time thinking about this as well, and I guess I went with the OG Indiana Jones. I went with Odysseus from the Odyssey.
They haven't made a movie about him for a very long time. Okay, so
no, and the last one I think had a lot of claymation in it. I went with because the cleverness, strategic thinking, leadership skills. He goes on it's the long journey and the problem solving, the ability to adapt and lead with a unifying vision. And then you both went with modern versions of Odysseus.
Maybe
I think,
Harrison Ford should play Odysseus this next time. Maybe that's the thing we're trying to call for right now.
I don't want to be the one to say it, but I think he's a little on the old side at this point. And I actually he could play Odysseus towards the end of the story, when he is actually probably that old. Or at least looks that old. So I'll add, because I think we both went with that route. My backup was going to be Alice from Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. I thought her adaptability and agility kind of worked pretty well, and she kind of handled the ever-changing and unpredictable situations throughout. So that was my backup.
No, I think riffing on that, though, I would say the Cheshire Cat is the one who's actually pulling all the strings here. So maybe like as product manager, but as a chaotic person, I feel like Cheshire Cat was the one that I would go with there.
Awesome. So let's just dive right into our first topic of the night. And we're talking about, first thing we're going to get into here is product operations. And so as we kind of get into this topic, I think for some folks it might be new. For other places, you have product operations, or you're exploring having product operations, or maybe you're confused as to what it is and what definition it should go by. So as you're thinking about it, I'd say something to maybe have in the back of your mind as we're talking it through is think about like what kind of chaos or identity issues are you seeing for product managers in your own organization? What's driving it? How is it impacting your products and teams? And I'd say for the chat room, think about this. Have you ever felt stuck on a problem only to find out you were looking at just like kind of a piece of the puzzle? How did zooming out help you see the bigger picture? I'd love to kind of see people. Feel free to post your comments. And also post comments, post questions. I'll be moderating throughout all of this, and I'll be working to get as many people involved and engaged in the conversation as possible, whether it's Chris and Patricia on camera or our off-camera roundtable made up of people all around the world. And so to kind of help set the scene a little bit, I thought it would be good if Chris, maybe you could kind of elaborate, tell us a little bit about what product operations is, or kind of give us a high-level overview.
Yeah, I mean, I think at like the simplest level, I think of it as PMing the PM experience. And so from that standpoint, right, like there's a lot of things that PMs do in their practice that they end up doing very solo. And, I think that's fine. Like product managers as a skill set, being customer obsessed, really thinking a lot about how do we build the right thing and how do we work with cross-functional members of the team to actually execute on that. I think sometimes you end up, when you start having multiple product managers together, there's certain things that need to be apples to apples or similar or understood in a way across these different places. And that can happen, but as your network starts to grow with product managers, it's harder and harder to do that. And especially because product managers end up working alone a lot of the time, right? So they end up being in a cross-functional team, and the only time they really get together ends up being maybe in whoever the director or head of product is that's having this like group meeting. They don't get a lot of time to learn, practice from each other, get feedback from each other, figure out ways that there are systemic issues within the way the process works that they can then do a better job around. So that's how I think about product management. I think there's like there's a real kind of there's a couple different people within the world, like Denise and Melissa just released a book about product operations, which is really good. And I mean, I definitely disagree a little bit that I think product operations should be about the data science or the user research parts. I think those should be cross-functional team members. Sometimes product managers have to step in to actually do the thing. But I also think like people like Marty Kagan, right? Like talking about the idea that the default case for product operations ends up being another PMO or project manager. I think it's not that either, right? Like ideally, product operations should be about the lived experience of the product managers inside the organization. And your product is actually the community of practice between the product managers and the individualized experience. And I think longer term, we have a lot of different types of like operations, like roles that are out there. So not just product ops, but there's also like DevOps, ops, finance ops, research ops, design ops, like all these different ops that are out there. When really what they're trying to do is they're trying to build better systems, better ways for people to work together, better ways for tools to actually help serve those things. And so I think longer term, it ends up turning into its own kind of cross-functional system, and maybe intersects in some way with like HR and people ops. But again, like HR and people ops seems to be more about protecting the company right now. I think longer term, how we actually just make decisions better within the organization. How do we make sure we're always working on the most important thing? How do we make sure that not only executives and leaders understand what's going on, but how do they provide context to those product managers? And then finally, how do we like communicate with our customers? That is more of a go-to-market type of functionality, but I've also seen product ops overlap with that too. So those are kind of like the different issues. I mean, a very simplistic case, I would say a lot of my role ends up focusing on, how do product managers have better conversations, not only within their own team, but across the entire team. So I think once you start to get to this point that you have multiple teams that are trying to coordinate, product ops is there to help with those systemic issues that may be holding the organization back in some way.
No, I think it's a great overview, and I think I definitely want to. I will explore a little bit more of the contradictions, the controversies,
exactly.
the challenges around product ops as we kind of dive further into this topic. Patricia, how do you see product ops fitting in with the broader product management landscape?
So I think that they serve a different function than product management, but a key function, right? So it's I think that they really support the activities of product management, but they're necessary and not less than. And so it's really important that people understand that it's two different things, but they're related. One's not better than the other. So the product manager is the person who is responsible for the strategy, the voice of the customer, the roadmap, the decisions about priorities for features, but supported by the data and the operations that make it run efficiently and don't make it complicated for the customer to actually use. So a really good customer experience, but informed by the information that's available from the product operations group. So two separate entities based on different disciplines, but related to support each other in sort of a team back and forth.
Yeah. So
actually, one thing I want to just add too, by the way, is like, I think one of the anti-patterns within product operations is that product ops ends up doing like the bullshit work that product people don't want to do. And that's an anti-pattern, right? Like just because it's kind of like the things that I've struggled with.
I thought that's what an associate product manager is
for. Exactly. That's the less tenured product managers that are supposed to be hazed to the way that we do our work. But no, I think like that's the thing I've seen sometimes is that like there's no one on the product team can do this work. And so who's going to do it? And it's like, oh, well, product ops is here to help make it easier. But the truth is that like there are a lot of times where just trying to offload that to product operations is not the right thing. There should actually just be another hire inside of product management. And so, yeah, that's what I'd say too.
So I wanted to follow up with you, Patricia. You're talking a lot about product ops and support. Let's double click into a few of these things. When you're talking about product ops support, what are some of those things that you should expect? What kind of areas of support should you be expecting from product ops?
So data and analytics, for instance, understanding the whole customer experience from end to end, the capability of actually making the product work. So all the intricacies of how do you actually get the product to work. The customer experience feedback. So as you're getting reporting, because of you're in the marketing, you're seeing how things are used. And so you've got really good data. So making sure those feedback loops are covered. Customer experience, maybe even a relationship with the frontline customer reps or the call centers or whatever, so that you're getting really good feedback loops.
Okay. Chris, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's the things that end up being really troublesome for product managers, I think, especially like I've worked in a lot of like very engineering driven organizations, there ends up being a lot of siloing because the engineering managers end up pushing a lot of the agenda for the way that those teams work. And so from a product ops standpoint, being able to help join, like Patricia said, across the experiences, right? So if we talk about like, I saw a question about like program management or TPM or project management that also exists within this world. I kind of see the way that like my particular role is kind of a specialization inside of product operations, but my role is to make sure that everything that is coming from the high abstraction level of our executive team gets translated correctly and tracked from the standpoint to the roadmap. And then below the roadmap, when we talk about like the day-to-day actions, estimation of engineering, are we de-risking all of our all the ways that we end up like shipping things, for example, that ends up being more of a TPM or a program manager role, because their job, I mean, it's almost like there's a spectrum within the world of like project and product management, right? And so when I was at Microsoft, I was a program manager, and at that point, it was kind of the unholy combination of project and product manager. I still did Gantt charts in MS Project. That's how long ago it was, and you know, I would then also do product management where I was trying to maximize innovation or differentiation of the product. And so there's a spectrum there where we want the right balance for the right type of industry, stage of the company, things like that. And so I think of TPMs, project managers, program managers as really being on that like de-risking side. And then product managers, and I also think product operations and the way that they end up helping product managers maximize innovation and differentiation is on the other side. But it's not one or the other, right? Like you need both of them having a tension between them to be able to create really great products. And so I think that's the part that I want to create a distinction around, is that even at the idea of like the roadmap, I'm going to be constantly pushing, are we doing the most important things right now? Are we making sure that we're giving time for experimentation? Are we creating processes that allow for space to be able to understand what's going on, that type of thing, versus the idea of like a TPM, again, will be hyper focused on, are we delivering what we're saying we're going to deliver? Is it going to come out at the times that are appropriate? And then you also have people like PMMs and go-to-market and all that stuff where it's like, is the message getting out to the customers in the right way? So I think, again, I've worked in a very large company context for a long time. So this is different for startups where, you know, the PM or the first PM kind of does all that stuff. And I Adam Thomas as well, I think, but he honestly keeps on talking about how, like, you don't want to be the first product manager at a startup because you're going to basically be fired within 6 months because the founder is the product manager. And in those cases, they just expect you to do the work that we're talking about that maybe is not bullshit work, but is like, it's the stuff that is more about coordination, and people mistake that idea of project and product management an awful lot.
Yeah.
I also want to make sure we talk about tools as well, because I think that that product ops has an ability to provide or recommendations for the tools that are best used by the product ops team as well as the product managers. And sometimes, like it may seem like a tool is a tool, but the reality is that can make a big difference how the day-to-day operations go, and sort of frustration level sometimes, right? Yeah. So that's a sort of a practical thing that leads into the processes and whatnot. And if you keep getting those kinds of things right, then it makes for a better relationship amongst the team.
Yeah, and yes, and I would say that, like, well, a lot of the problems that we end up having with product managers ends up being they just think that they have to keep doing things the way that they keep on seeing them done by other people. But the reality is, like, a context may change about what's appropriate. And so I think, like, I always think about it, and maybe, this comes from like my consulting background, but like people, process, and tools. And so we always want to like figure out like what are the issues between people. For example, we have to think about individuals, like how does this actual product leader want to deal with things versus the individuals. And so then that leads you to like, what are the processes? And then to your point, like, yeah, tools end up being the bedrock by we do this. And so sometimes we have to choose more generic tools because we want flexibility in the way we do those people and process. So I totally agree.
Why do you, kind of looking at the career side of things, why have we seen product ops suddenly kind of emerge as this distinct role in product teams in recent years?
I mean, I think it's because generally this type of duty has gone to the leader within a product management team, and they have zero time for that. And so what they end up doing is they do the machinations of management, and they maybe are a leader when it comes to the way they assemble all of the prioritization, but they don't really deal with the way that the team does their work a lot of the time, other than when there's a crisis. And so you end up having these times where suddenly things are going wrong, so they have to like step in and create a new process or figure out a new way for people to work with each other. This is meant to be a proactive stance that we're constantly trying to understand what's going on with the team to be able to create better experiences for them. And so that's why my customer is actually, in a lot of ways, the individual product manager. Inside my role right now, we're also having a really good discussion about like, is it actually the VP of product or the individual product manager, and how do we prioritize those needs between the two different things, right? Because if a head of product can't be effective in communicating the things they need, creating processes that they want, it also means that the product managers can't be effective. But at the same time, we can't lose sight that if we have bad individualized experiences, that the VP of product will not be successful either. And so this almost gets to like, operational excellence is a term that is thrown around an awful lot within like product ops communities. And it's a tough one to deal with because like a lot of the places that are actually operationally excellent are not always places that are considered to be great places to work. And so I'm constantly struggling with those two things inside of like my brain about like, how do we, ask for agency and autonomy as an individual, but how are we also responsible and accountable for the things we do? And that's a very hard tension to deal with inside of teams.
Yeah, it's definitely, even myself, I've looked at a lot of, when you're looking at those places, and I won't name them at the moment. I'll see how I'm feeling towards later in our talk. But a lot of these places, I think you're talking about, like, they do have this operational excellence or operational excellence, at least philosophically, maybe not always executionally, but they have the right plan, they have the right ideas, but then there's no follow through. And I think a lot of the time it gets established by a really smart group of people, and then they've left or they've moved on to another role. Yeah. And I think there's a challenge with having that stickiness. And I think that's, to me, where product ops kind of comes in, where you can have that continuity, where it's not solely and wholly dependent on that top product lead or the person who kind of innovated those concepts. Like, you could be something as simple as just having OKRs. Like, you could have an advocate for OKRs. You could say you want to do it, but if that person's not there and you don't have an organization or a framework of people to make sure it continues afterwards, and support it, it just kind of falls apart and degrades. Patricia, what do you see as some of the skills and qualities that are most important for someone looking to pursue a career in product ops?
Well, I actually think really good people skills. I think that you have to be able to explain a concept and be able to get people engaged and enrolled in whatever that is, but also sort of also an attention to detail in understanding what the impact is in actually putting the product into market and what that could actually mean on the back end. So kind of an ability to see the full end to end, but also the collaboration skills to understand where things need to be impacted. So it's a strategic, but also executional and specific. Okay.
Chris, do you have something you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's, that's why I think there's like so much overlap with the skills that people get really good at product management inside of product operations. I think like a lot of people end up coming from more pure operational roles, customer engagement, like those types of roles into product operations. And it's because they have a deep understanding of like how to deal with people. So I think that's like echoing what Patricia just said. I mean, I also think that like when we talk about the expertise here, is it ends up being kind of, I think product ops people should be really great at all of the different types of frameworks and process and procedures and possibilities when it comes to the way that people should work together. So we're here, I actually heard someone recently kind of say that, what used to be agile coaching has like some interesting ties to the way that I think that product operations ends up going. I know that agile coaching is like a dirty word now. And so I've seen some people rebrand themselves from like agile people to product operations. And I think there's like something really interesting to talk about there, because what we're talking about is like team dynamics and coaching of teams to be better at something. And maybe getting to your point about the way that like teams, and especially, I mean, maybe we're getting into like, I don't want to like jump into system thinking too early in this discussion, but I think there's really something important about what I've started to notice is that really like the teams or the organizations that have really great culture that is consistent. What that means is that at every level from a fractal standpoint, there's consistency in the way that they end up dealing with things. And so the ones that end up being really disjointed is that like executive team does things this way and the rest of the team does things this way. Whereas if you look at people like, if we want to use GE or Amazon as examples of like places that have kind of good, I would say like consistent operational culture, they're very successful, or they were during their heyday, right? GE, maybe not GE anymore, right?
Both of them, right? Like even like I saw you hedge on Amazon.
Like, well, so like, I have friends that are from Amazon. Okay, I think they're fine people. Okay, like all
I think what I wanted to just quickly add to what you were saying about Amazon, like it came from the top down. Like you had that structure, right. And it just got baked into really everything. And to me, the hedge I heard was that it is also a culture that'll burn you out and
it will in some ways, right? Like I've definitely heard a lot of people get burnt out, or they're constantly churning through people in a way that they like remove their bottom X% of people, quote unquote, right? And so what I'm saying here though is that like PRFAQs are an example, or pizza meetings, or these types of things, like directly responsible individual, or I'm sorry, single-threaded leader is the terminology they use. But like in those cases, it is consistent up and down, right? Like if you want to do something new, you as a leader or as an individual contributor have to write a PRFAQ, and it's going to be critiqued in very similar ways. And so I think that's the thing that like I've started to notice is that like really great cultures tend to be consistent between levels of power. And so I think like probably part of product operations role is to understand that system and try to re-even the distinction of power and consistency within those levels of power. Because I think that builds a better culture overall. And so this is like kind of a new thinking. I was just on John Cutler's podcast like a couple weeks ago. And so like we talked about this afterwards. And so I think there's like something really interesting about that. And I'm not sure what that means yet, but I just seem to notice that whenever there is a distinction between those things, there's more disjointment in the way that those teams work together as a whole.
Yeah. And I'd say to folks, don't feel bad. Most companies are that disjointed.
Well, it's like you can't do like the idea. I keep on seeing these posts on like LinkedIn where it's like adopt the pizza meeting, pizza size meeting, and read at the beginning of the meeting. So like those are just like rituals and tactics that are part of this culture that is like very fully formed and consistent. And so just adopting that doesn't mean you're going to be successful in the same way.
And it also helps like those kinds of tactical things, I'd say, like they can help you kind of in your local sphere and help kind of clean things up. But I think as soon as your local world starts to bump into all the other parts of the company and they're not operating the same way, you'll realize there might be only so far that you can kind of push it without changing the layers above you. And
that's right.
So the one of the things that you had mentioned, we originally were talking about skills that people need, and you said you kind of knowing all the different frameworks. I did want to do a call out to your initiative, the Uncertainty Project. It's a great website. I've been spending a lot of time kind of going through it, and I definitely I would recommend that to everyone listening. In that you talk about all these different frameworks and different approaches, and I've known Chris, by the way, for a very long time. And one of the things I've always loved about Chris is he's always kind of cross-pollinating ideas from all kinds of different industries, different kind of fields of expertise, psychology, etc., and figuring out how you can kind of layer that into a framework and apply it to creation and making products and working with teams and people. So I did want to mention that.
Well, I want to say that also, like I'm a co-founder, so there's like two other people that are part of this as well. And again, it's like I think a really great community for like decision making and strategy, and also like I just want to be completely upfront here. I mean, I did work for Jeremy for a little while, so he put up with me for a certain period of time, and I appreciate that. That was what he said on my last review as well. So I'm glad that there's consistency.
I want to. There's a question that I want to throw up here from Chris Azoniak. Taking on a new role with our data science team, which may end up being product ops. What recommendations do you have for bringing process to a group that typically has had very minimal?
Yeah.
Patricia?
So I think you need, especially with data science, you have to set it up so that the data is accessible and you understand why that particular data is being used. So, and who's actually using it. So I would assume that it's product management and some of the other folks are actually using that. So the processes are about collecting data, understanding why that data is being used and how it's being used, and then accessibility, like who's actually going to be doing that.
Gotcha. I want to go to the next question, which is from Jim Rome. What is the ideal relationship between product operations and the engineering team? Should there be a connection there, or should that relationship be left to traditional PMs to collaborate with? Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of our, like if I think about the ranking of customers of the product operations group, I think like individual PMs is number one, honestly. I think right below that ends up being the partner team. Partner teams are maybe systemic issues that are happening where information is not being conveyed in a way that's helpful, or people are not able to get things done that they need to. And so I would just say that part of our job is to constantly be understanding that from the standpoint of like engineering people. I would say TPM as well, like any of these cross-functional teams. Like I like, for example, there's a new kind of like privacy champion for our group. And so reaching out to them to understand like, what are their needs? Is it being serviced or not? Like, how do we help modify or help that in some way? That is definitely a product operations role, because it should roll into all of the different things that you're doing with regards to programs around the people, process and technology. I do think also what's really interesting is, when I first got started at GitHub and I just joined in January, the first 90 days, I talked to every product manager and did kind of like an interview, a qualitative interview about how things were working, what was success here, what they changed, things like that. I think that for these cross-functional groups, one way to do that is not kind of like interviewing every single cross-functional person, is to start to be part of every retrospective that ends up being run by your team. And so in those cases, you start to understand actually the interactions between people and what are the things that this team wants to do differently. And it doesn't mean that you're going to fix everything, because there's also like other people in the engineering side that are focusing on this type of thing in a larger organization too. And so from that perspective, I use those, especially like helping product managers run these types of things. It gets a lot. That's what I would add, is like, I think you should know who these people are. You should talk to them and you should understand the problems that they're having. And if there's a systemic problem across all PMs and engineering relationships, that's where product operations should step in to try to help.
Gotcha. Someone also posted a question from Andley. This is talking a little bit about the layoffs that people have been seeing across different industries. And he's noticed that, as you mentioned earlier, design ops has shifted back to design leaders due to recent layoffs. Have you guys seen a similar situation happening in product ops? Or, I guess product ops, we should just never lay off because they're essential, right? Patricia?
So I haven't seen it so much in as much in other areas like design ops, but product ops, again, that's sort of a necessary. And not that design isn't, but it is sort of what keeps things rolling, right? So it's a different kind of work and fundamental in a certain way.
I got to your statement of necessary. Your statement of necessary, like, is product ops a requirement in everywhere you go? When is it, or if not, when does it become a requirement for an organization?
So the way that I look at it, it is a requirement, because it's kind of, I look at it as the way that things keep running, and that it's the information, the infrastructure, the methods by which you, and the processes by which you actually deliver product and service, well, the services of that group, right? So I think it's necessary in a certain way. So yeah.
Chris?
I mean, I definitely feel like it's a value to an organization. I think actually user researchers have been more impacted by a lot of the layoff trends that have been happening than I mean, and there's definitely like specific teams right now. So like even at Google, that they're being more precise about which teams they end up laying off, it seems, than just doing like randomization.
You don't need Python anymore.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not like it's the main language that people use to do machine learning. But anyways, the point is that like, yeah, I think the problem is for like roles that end up being more ambiguous, and they end up actually worrying more about like, you know, there was a great podcast with the person who wrote Intangibles, which is a lot about like sports. But this idea of kind of the way that teams end up working together, it's very hard to measure that. And this comes in with like the real struggle that I think a lot of product ops people have is like, how do I actually show a benefit of my practice, right? And part of that, like, I think some people end up starting to go to like, do we have like higher velocity within the teams? And I don't think that's the right thing, right? Like that actually is, well, one, that's a bad metric in general. It's an internal metric, not a metric that other people should be judged by. But then it's like, we're really not here to make sure that things go faster. We're here to make sure that things are better. And so in those cases, like, and I've tried to make the argument internally that I actually do product ops more by vibes than by metrics. And that's been a hard sell. Right, like I can't build a vibes dashboard. Yeah, I can't build a vibes dashboard.
Don't worry, it feels good right now.
But here's what I've actually used in the last couple roles is if someone says publicly without me prompting them in a meeting, Chris helped me with this thing, right? I expect a certain cadence of that. Like, you know, at my last place, it was like monthly. I'm still getting started here, but it still is like one of those things that I think it's like, qualitatively, we felt that something is better and we're linking it to some of the actions that took place. And so I think that's the part that's really hard. It's the same thing for product managers. Like, yes, you can be super focused on just like shipping stuff, and you can be super focused on following metrics like ARR or other types of like revenue things, but it really doesn't get at like, is this good for the customer? Right? Is this good for the long-term viability of the business? And that's the hard part. And so I don't have a good answer for that, but that is a real struggle for product operation.
No, you're touching on like a lot of the same thing, like a lot of places over the years that I've interacted with. We want a product manager. Why do you want a product manager? We want to release products faster. I was like, no, exactly. That's probably not going to happen at all.
Want the stories more likely the opposite. Well articulated.
Yeah. But you touched on it a little bit, metrics, and so I wanted to. I understand you want to go by vibe and kind of, I guess, be kind of a whole hippie sort of thing kind of going on about it. I guess that's the California side of you talking there.
Exactly.
My question is, at the end of the day, there has to be some metric, especially as you report upwards and to kind of show the value of product ops and help other people be able to see it. Like, what are some of those key metrics product ops should be focusing on?
I mean, I personally think it's attrition and retention of the product team. And I think the types and segmentation of attrition and retention are the ones that I think about a lot. And that's why, like, you know, whenever someone new joins, I always want to be part of their onboarding group of people to talk to. And whenever someone leaves, like, yes, HR does an exit interview, but it's not a real one, right? Like, it's not the one that actually matters. And so like I do an exit interview as well, because I want to understand, right? Like there are certain things that maybe made this person leave. And sometimes it's just like a better opportunity, and that's great, right? Or sometimes it's like I had to change my life circumstance. But I think there are times where there's like real issues with the way that this person didn't fit here and we thought that they should.
I think that's an excellent point. Like an exit interview to augment the capabilities of product ops.
Absolutely.
That's
that's our entire thing. Like if we talk about the user journey, right? Like our user journey is joining to leaving and potentially the interview and alumni process as well, right? Like, and so I think about that a lot as like the entire experience. And so that's why, like for product ops too, it's like there's things that I will help people as they get onboarded, but there's like different maturity things that start to happen inside the org too. And so anyways, that's kind of like.
So we can get rid of HR then, is what you're saying.
Well, I mean. Like, honestly, a lot of what I'm doing right now, there is a need for compliance and regulatory stuff. Needs to be protections for the way that corporations operate. But I think like people ops and product ops and dev ops and design ops, I think the future of this is that real people ops is more about the way people work And I think product ops is trying to think about that now. So
agree
I don't know.
with that.
Probably.
I agree with that a lot. Patricia, metrics.
So I actually think it's sort of the success of the individual products as well. So it's like, and it could be the number of accounts that were new accounts, the attrition of customers leaving. So sort of a customer focus. I think that at the end of the day, that's why the company is there, is to service customers, right? So you want to make sure that you have the voice of the customer as as your main metrics. And then there are, of course, the other things that have to do with how the organization, how the product organization is supporting those customers. And so it could be, the time that it took to get something out the door, or it could be the time that it took to actually have the data in a reporting way that's accessible and usable and whatnot. So that's a process thing. So time types of considerations. But at the end of the day, it's really all about the customer and what are your metrics around the customer and how does that extrapolate to your metrics about how you're supporting reaching that customer and servicing that customer.
Yeah, and it does feel like maybe the whole product team, their job is to also try to figure out what is the model between customer signals to actual business success. Right. And it's not always, I don't think it's always like product ops job to do that. Like, I think there should be a theory that product managers are working with to figure out, like, how does shipping this thing actually relate to more business success? I mean, I do want to say though, that like, I think that's the problem for product ops people in focusing on the success of the company or the success of the customer ends up allowing us to be the extra force that does the bullshit work for product managers. So that's the balance that I think we need to figure out, right? Is that, like, if we're just all there, just make sure we're like making revenue in some way, I think product ops can then be used to just make more revenue. And so that could be like, we just need you to go out and like sell things. And so I think like that's why, like, I keep on trying to push on this like ideal of like, yes, there are things that we can measure where it's like, like for like decisions that we make, for example, right? Do we track those? Do we understand the efficacy of them? Do we understand whether the process was better this time than last time? That is something that, while is not fully quantitative, you can at least start to pull out information that, like, here's all the different things that we made decisions around. How did they work out? Are we missing something in the way we make decisions? And so I think there's something there. I don't know what that is yet, as far as like a pure metric. I do think, like, longer term, I do see the fact that more and more of this stuff is going to be recorded and transcribed. And with the ability for tools to be able to do summarization of things, I think we get into a realm where we can start to build tripwires and metrics around things that are usually more qualitative, whereas we would have to go in and tag them specifically. We may be able to have systems that can start to do a better, like an okay job on that type of thing. And so, like, was this conversation functional and helpful for everybody in the room? There's probably like a way to look at the transcript to see, like, did everybody get a chance to talk? Did everybody like voice their opinion? How much divergence in opinion was there? Those are things I think are really exciting about like some of these tools. And so again, I don't know what that means yet. And I realize that this can either feel like dystopic or utopic depending on who you are. But like, I think that's something that's very interesting in the future.
Yeah. And thank you for not saying AI.
I was able to avoid it.
Okay. What are some of the misconceptions about product ops that you've seen that people should try to steer clear of? Misconceptions, or we can get into some of the more controversial things at this point as well.
Well, I think it's that the issue that Chris brought up, which is, oh, well, we'll just give it to product ops to figure out. Like, oh, it's a problem. We're just going to have them figure it out, and it's the work that nobody else really wants to do, and so we're just going to have a collection of people that are doing the work, the project work or whatever that people don't want to do, and that the skills are support skills only, when in fact they are not support skills only. The skills that require someone to be really good at product ops are difficult. I mean, it's there's a lot to it, and it takes a lot of like I said, the people skills. There takes a lot of negotiation and sort of being able to really manage different personalities and perceptions, and to be able to do it in a way that you're thinking holistically of what the product is and how it's impacting different areas, all while getting things out the door or supporting other people within the organization. So I think it's the consideration of it being less than, and that's a misconception. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, I think, I would add to this too, that I think the misconception that product ops is here to change the way that product people as individual contributors do their work without actually changing the way the leaders do their work, right? Like, because of the way that power structures work, if you don't have actual senior people modeling the behavior that you want for people that are lower in the hierarchy, it won't happen, right? Like, I think, there have been people that I've worked with that really want to have like a writing culture, for example. And a lot of these people come from Amazon. And what happens though is, like, when those people from Amazon, if they're not there reading every document and commenting on it, engaging and actually providing feedback, and also writing and getting feedback on their documents, we end up not actually creating the change inside the organization that we want to. And so I think that's a misconception about product ops, is that we're there just to make sure that the ICPMs do what they're told, right, in some new way. We're there actually ideally to change the way the leaders think about things too, because I think they end up not hearing the feedback. So I feel like part of my value to leaders ends up being side channeling them feedback that people are not feeling like they can actually give to them. And part of my job, I think sometimes when I'm in these roles where it's like, if I report to like a VP of product and there's other peers that are in the room, my job is sometimes just to be the person who challenges that VP to make sure that it's okay that other people can do that too. So it's kind of like modeling, again, the behavior I want to see inside this organization usually is like more open conversations, because I think it's better for the organization. And so I think that's a misconception. There's just like, we're there to make sure we organize all of the way PMs do their work, when the reality is, like, part of our job is actually to see the way that leaders are working and how we can make them more effective in the way that they actually communicate and work with the other people.
So for an organization that's thinking about introducing product ops into their org, what is the best way for them to kind of start thinking about it, or to kind of go about it? And as well as, what is the best way to kind of avoid some of these pitfalls that we're talking about?
I'd say have a real sense of roles and responsibilities, and be able to define exactly what those are, and have it understood across the various stakeholders, so that there's an understanding of who's actually doing what and what the contribution is of each of those groups.
What's
a good start?
What, Patricia, what would be like the best way to get started? I mean specifically, even more finely grained than saying, like, what are the different roles for people? Like, what's like a first activity that product maybe not even creating a formal product ops group, but having someone do this part of what they're doing is going to be some product ops that, if it grows, it'll turn into a full-blown organization.
So I think it's like very granular. What are people working on a given day? Like, know exactly what the tasks are that you're working on, and what percentage of your day you're spending on these various tasks, to outline what it is that you're actually doing, to then look across the various people in the organization to know if there's overlap, if it could be done in a different way. So it's kind of using the detail to take a step back and have a more holistic view.
Chris, you had something to add?
Yeah, I mean, I think like getting started usually is just understanding where there are frictions inside the organization in some way. So like, what's stopping people from feeling like they're doing their best work, or the work that's really effective. And so like, I just did a workshop with one of our groups the other week, where we, and the technical like workshop facilitation stuff, we did like an ideal present workshop that then led into like an SUI mapping workshop. And so what this meant is we looked at kind of what are the good and bad things that are happening here, which are kind of like a retro. We talked about like, what are these like really good futures, what are really bad futures, and then what do we do to actually avoid the bad future and bring about the really good future. And that then led to a bunch of kind of like constraints and issues and problems and frictions that we end up having. And then we start to look at like, you know, in the SON mapping, which is from Dave Snowden of Cynefin, like is really about this idea of like, what is the time and effort to be able to change things inside the organization? And so things that are like really high time and energy, we just try to avoid, at least for the near term, because those are not within our domain of control. And then there's other things that are like almost like negative energy where they're just going to happen because there's like fluctuations and the way that works. And so we start to then identify like within this team, what can we change the way we do our work? And
you're talking about like several of these friction points, and
yeah,
can you maybe give a few examples of maybe specific friction points people might want to look out for that you've at least seen as pretty common where you've gone?
I mean, in like engineering driven organizations, usually there's a lot of siloing that ends up happening. And so those PMs on those teams end up having not as good of a view of like how decision making and the stuff that's going on between these different silos. And the reason why that's important is that like if we're always going to be working on the most important thing, we want to usually build things that are end-to-end valuable experiences for customers. When we have a lot of siloing, we end up building a lot of small components that then fit together. And ideally, you know, in like a very large ecosystem of products inside of an organization, they're like composable and modules and they can fit together, but they don't always fit in a way that actually makes sense from like an end-to-end journey standpoint. And so I think that's one of the most common things I've seen inside these like engineering driven organizations is that they build a lot of great stuff, but they don't connect together well. And we don't track the way that things actually work end to end. So like you'll even have like siloing of data between those people. So I can tell you in this product how well this thing is working, but I can't tell you like across, like for the entire experience of this person, for the really valuable metrics that we want to track, like how they're doing across all those things. And so that's where I think like product ops can come in and start to say, okay, well, what we should do is like when we do reviews of what's going on, we should focus on this end-to-end thing. And so rather than saying for your section what's going on, we say how are you fitting into this larger narrative? And so I think those are that's like an example of like something that I think I've struggled with in almost every single engineering driven team that I've been part of.
And even a little bit further than that, like how it fits into the overall product itself from a design standpoint, like the human-centered design elements of it. So if you have the organization and the different groups are working on it, but you want to make sure that if you're building something and you're connecting everything, that there's a reason why you're doing it and that you've thought about why you're doing it. So getting the input from those folks that are doing the design and whatnot, so that there's a constant interaction between that too.
Excellent. So we're gonna go to our next segment now. This has been a really great conversation about product apps. I hope everyone's kind of gotten at least a few new takeaways or a few new thoughts about product apps that they haven't seen or thought of before. With that said, we're gonna go to our trivia segment, and our trivia question of tonight is, who said it? Who recently said the rise of product owners has done more damage to the craft of product than anything else I can think of in the past 40 years? So it's a great quote. I love the article. I would say, Chris, Patricia, if you have thoughts, don't say the answer. Same for anyone in the comments. Don't post the answer. But if you have thoughts, if you have comments, feel free to talk. But
I feel like I've met this person before a few times, and they're a very nice person. Okay, they're not usually this inflammatory. Although I don't believe that I feel like product ops is one of those roles that we probably should retire as a title.
You mean product owner? I think.
Sorry, product owner, not product ops. Sorry, yes, that's right. Yeah, product.
No, we're retiring product ops as well. Surprise! It's had its time. The rise of, so just once again, who said the rise of product owners has done more damage to the craft of product than anything else I can think of in the past 40 years? So with that said, we're going to go to our next topic, which is about systems thinking. So to kind of get it kicked off, get us started out here, Patricia, could you kind of give us an overview, some background into what the heck is systems thinking?
So it's basically a holistic approach to looking at how entities are interconnected. So elements are interconnected and they function in a certain way because they are part of that system. And so it's basically an approach to problem solving that has like an ecosystem approach. Like you're looking at it holistically and you're looking at the big picture, but then you kind of dial and zoom into certain areas and see how those areas are functioning and how they're related into the whole. And that because they're part of a system, then it can, there's certain things that can happen within the system that are pretty standard types of issues that you could pay attention to and find ways of improving operations or improving a product, or in fact create a new product by looking at the leverage points. And it's, instead of linear, it's a circular orientation, the holistic approach.
Chris, can you maybe give an example as to maybe how you've maybe a problem that you've approached with systems thinking?
Yeah, I mean, I've definitely used this a lot, even in like as a product manager. And I actually believe a lot in kind of, you know, so there's systems thinking and cybernetics, which were really the beginnings of these things, where people were talking about the way that different systems engage with each other. And so I think like soft systems methodology, which came out of Checkland like in the 80s, was that we kept on building these like very specific systems thinking models, but there were like these squishy things inside the system that kept on screwing everything up, and it was people. And so we had to start including people. We had to start including them in the way we do analysis. So like even something as simple as like a rich picture exercise I would do whenever we're like kicking off a project to understand the way that like not only the systems, like socio-technical systems that we're building, which include the idea of like machines inside of there. And so that could be just an ERP system or a website or whatever. Even service design, I think, starts to get at this, which is like there are people that are actually engaging inside of these systems that are doing things like in the service design world, it would be like backstage, like what are all the customer support people doing in the background, or what are the IT people doing in the background that are like enabling these systems. And so I think that's where I've started to really think about is like, how do we build this understanding of not only like within our organization, what are all the people and machines that are doing stuff together, but also how does that then interact with the outer system? And I think that's like a very key thing for just like product management in general, right? Like a skill that we should be constantly honing is how do we reframe the set of things that we're actually considering. And that could mean sometimes zooming in very specifically into a problem or a fire or an issue, right? But it could also mean like reframing to something larger than we're working on to be able to like interact with other parts of the system. Because like I think one of the, like the stories I had heard first when I was like understanding this idea of like system thinking was that someone was being asked to like revise a report that was being handed off between people. And so you could revise that report and you could make it digital, you could do all this stuff. But the problem was, is like when you zoom out a little bit more, that report actually wasn't necessary because it was like a step between 4 different teams. And if you just decided to say that these 2 teams should have access to similar information in some way, you no longer need this like specific report. And so I think that's where I think system thinking is really valuable and important.
You mentioned service design. Should I be are they the same thing? Should I be service design and
exactly.
systems thinking the same? Like how help me understand what the line is, or how I should be thinking about them differently.
I would say that like there's an entire group of people that are about system thinking, right? And I would put John Cutler in that group of system thinkers around things, right? I think there's like complex adaptive system thinkers, which is like Santa Fe Institute and people like that, which are thinking about like the way that these things have emergent behaviors. And then service design is actually a branch out of just like design in general. And I kind of like joke sometimes that I'm not like a card carrying member of service design, because there was like this kind of like very not insular, but like there was a protective group of people that were talking about service design for a little while, where
Right.
you know, they had really interesting practices, like being able to understand everything that was going on, but also this idea of like using role play and prototyping with people doing things and stuff like that, which I've stolen definitely in my practice. And so that's what I'd say is like, I think service design comes out of the more of the design practice, but definitely thinking about soft systems. I think it's like an evolution of soft systems methodology and the way that they think about things. That's what I would.
And it's also to consider the fact that one entity could be working on something and it has impact on other groups, and sometimes it's difficult to actually think about what the impact might be. But if you start on a regular basis thinking about, well, I'm doing this in my group, what's the impact in other places? And it just becomes sort of a practice. Then you may come up with some solutions that you might not have come up with otherwise, because you're not thinking in your one discipline, you're thinking in other disciplines. And now you may end up having to talk to somebody else who has more expertise in that other discipline. But the fact that you're actually thinking, well, how can I make this product better, or how can I make this experience better? You do it like kind of naturally, because you've been thinking about how do you do a more cross-discipline approach versus a silo approach. So by virtue of the fact that it's ecosystems, it's not lending itself to silo, it's lending itself to a multidisciplinary approach.
Yeah, so I want to continue with that, Patricia. In helping product people understand, product managers help them understand why they should care about systems thinking. Can you elaborate a little bit more about how systems thinking helps product managers navigate the trade-offs between short-term and long-term gains, sustainability of a product, of a service?
Yeah, so basically you're basically thinking about all the components of the product, or how it's actually being used. So you're thinking about how the product gets built, how it gets put to the market, and what the impact is while it's in market. So you're taking a step back from your day to day to be in a more a more strategic view. So it's a holistic view, a step back. And so by doing that, you'll come up with things that you wouldn't have necessarily come up with otherwise. So I'll give you an example for myself, that when I was working at Citi, I was creating a product, and there was a way in which, by stepping back, I could see that there were some things that I could do that would allow another product to be created as a result of the end-to-end activities, right? So it kind of it gives you the opportunity to be able to be creative, because you know all the information about your product at hand. But by stepping back and seeing, well, what's the market telling me? What are the components, and how might they be related to each other, that I could put it into a whole new product?
Chris, you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think like two things that I think about a lot are that, like, product-led growth as a terminology is really about expanding the frame of what product managers involve themselves in to be also like the way that leads come in and convert, right? Whereas before, we may have thought about them as, we're just going to build the perfect product, and then it's up to someone else to figure out how the people get in there, right, in some way. So I think that's like an example of that. And then another example, and it's maybe more like visceral, but like, we have to actually consider externalities of the system a lot of the time whenever we're building technology now, especially when we talk about systems that may have an impact on like society. And so we have to draw the border of our framing to be wider. And so like a lot of like responsible AI groups are about that type of redrawing of the boundary. And maybe like a very specific example would be when we talk about things like autonomous weapons, right? Like autonomous weapons, we're usually just drawing the border around like the person that's a decision maker and the thing that's actually doing something. When the reality is like we probably like, and this is like the way that the military kind of like thought process has started to go, is that it's not just about the idea of like kinetic effect in the way that we like do something, but it's about like, what is the impact of that society that we're having? And so like with autonomous weapons, for example, like the person who's being shot at is part of the system. And we rarely start to actually think about the way that they are part of that system in some way. And the way that we allow them to also, like opt out, like they're a citizen and not a combatant, right? Or the idea of the way that we end up understanding efficacy and or like what went wrong. We don't think about those things when we frame situations in a very narrow way. And so, again, that's a very visceral example, but I just want to be very clear. I think that's why like the reason why things like fairness and bias and all those like other responsible AI types of discussions end up happening is because we want to redraw the boundary of the box that we're talking about, basically.
No, it's interesting that you used that as an example. Over 20 years ago, I'll tell you, over 20 years ago, I was involved in a project that was about making that actually was putting AI into missiles at the time, and
Yeah,
the idea was to make it so that if it looked like it was a non-combatant, that it would veer off or it wouldn't
yeah,
detonate,
that's
and
right.
making missiles more intelligent about what they were actually aimed at, and go,
That's
hey,
right.
wait, this I shouldn't hit, and to
That's
steer
right.
away.
Well,
Um,
and like,
yeah.
from my background too, when I was in college, I thought I might go through the military and or get into like video game design. So I took a lot of ROTC courses when I was in college, and one of the
Wait,
biggest
did you
problems
say
we
it was
talked.
military versus video games? Those were
Yeah,
the
it was
two.
either going to be
Okay.
military or it was going to be like making military games.
Okay.
And the person who was like the main person that I worked with a lot during those courses, and I was definitely a weird person. I was the non-enlist, like
I
non.
can't imagine.
I know. And so we talked about like a lot of the issues, but even the idea of like friendly fire, right, are
Hmm.
things that are real issues that, you know, military has struggled with for forever, right, when it comes to these types of things. And so the idea of like a kinetic effect or the ability to just like launch or shoot something is not enough to consider, right? It's not about the functionality, it's about the impact on the environment. And if you go back to even like people like John Boyd, which I'm a big fan of, who's a military strategist, and I've visited his like archives in Quantico twice at this point. Like he thinks an awful lot about like the entire system, which ends up including things like moral, mental, and physical aspects of those types of things. So again, like I think systems thinking is about the idea, to Patricia's point, about like all of these different disciplines and practices and the way that they actually, the way you end up either understanding or combining all of these different effects together is really important and ends up being really impactful in the way that we end up building any type of product, not just ones that are life or death, but like ones that are about like, did we do a better job to help this person?
And it's currently it's certainly used in sustainability projects where people
Yeah.
are looking for the circular orientation rather than a linear orientation, to be able to think about what's the overall impact, what could be unintended consequences, like going in, creating the product, thinking already about things that you wouldn't necessarily think about, but having an eye on that. Of course, unintended consequences, you can't really be thinking of that in advance necessarily, but you can think based on the history of other situations or other products. How can you create something that is circular and not causing more damage to the ecosystem, be it an environmental ecosystem or a business ecosystem, right? So it's a different way of thinking of it, but you got to start somewhere, right? So it's, rather than linear, it's circular.
Yeah, and I mean, I think adding
go ahead.
something to this, by the way, is that like, the issue around unintended consequences is a really hard one, especially when we start talking about like non-deterministic systems, which I didn't say AI, but I meant that. And in those cases, right, like there are ways that we don't know what will be the impact because the interaction between systems becomes more and more volatile over time. And those types of cases where, we used to call them edge cases, I would call them special cases or important cases or something like that. Like really, really important cases end up coming up where there's unintended consequences. And so we should learn from, practices like SRE or chaos engineering or those other types of groups that are really all about like, how do we actually adapt to things that we see in the real world? And this is like referred to inside the AI, like the AI and machine learning world of like drift or other types of unintended things. And so like what becomes really important is actually how do we build a practice of like reaction? And so I think this is maybe related back to the product ops thing, but like, how do we actually start to look at all of the different fires or escalations that are happening inside of a team? How do we use the thematic kind of association between those fires or issues to then do a better job of like communicating strategy or like evolving our strategy to really be making hard decisions easier for the rest of our team? And so those types of adaptive things are not just about the idea of like internally, how are we doing this, but how are we understanding the reaction to the outside world? And I think system thinking is a much better model for us to actually understand that.
Yeah, and I'd say an example for people who are listening, in that where non-determinism has directly impacted you, is that you don't have to look further than just even Google search. If you're looking at
Yeah.
Google search, it used to have a very clear algorithms designed by people, very thought through, And at some point, in the last, I don't know, 5-ish years, it was made to be the algorithm. There was a lot more non-determinism built into the algorithm, a lot more uncertainty, where people just, they don't know what the ghost in the machine necessarily is, and how to control it or how to really optimize it for people. And it's a lot of just that trial and error. So I just want to give that as an example.
Well, it's been longer than
that,
by the way, since they've been using those types of systems internally. But like I would just say that, like,
I
to your
say
point,
where it got ramped up.
Well, so interpretability is a key issue inside these systems, right? And so,
Yeah.
do we understand, or are we able to build mental models about the way that we should interact with the system or not? Right. That's a real key issue.
Yeah, Patricia, can you help us understand when we're talking about systems thinking, like, what is the process? So if I'm approaching my product or managing my product with kind of a systems thinking philosophy, what are the steps? Like, what am I going through? How am I thinking about it? Like, what is that step 1, 2, 3, etc.?
So basically, the discipline of systems thinking uses what are called stock and flow models. And so basically a stock and flow model is where you think about what it is that you're producing, and then think about what the impact is on other areas. So you basically do a particular type of mapping that you outline the various activities for various stakeholders, but you specifically map it so that you think of it in advance. So it may well be that it's a company, like an organization, and then what is the impact in the community, for instance. So it's thinking of the stakeholders and being very specific about those stakeholders, and then thinking about the impact. So what's the stock, like what is it that they're creating, and what is the impact in the environment, or where you're actually thinking of what the downstream impacts might be. And also thinking about what are called mental models, meaning why are the stakeholders thinking about something in a certain way. And so the discipline of doing that helps set the table for then moving into the product development. So you've already kind of outlined what you think the environment's going to be, and now you're taking another step to actually create the product, having thought of, it may seem like a lot of externalities, but by doing that in advance, that it gives you information so that your product can be more finely tuned, or that you know what to ask the customers as you're putting together your human-centered design, right? So it's a good step to set the table to then go further into making your product requirements.
Is there, you have like a specific example, like what kicks off the process? Am I looking for hidden problems or hidden opportunities? Am I trying to figure out about building a feature? Am I trying to solve a specific problem? Like, is there like a concrete example you could give?
Yeah, and usually it's when you're creating a new product, for instance. So you're kind of going through the process of thinking of the product in almost in a completely global way. So meaning that you're thinking of all the people that it would impact, all the departments that are engaged. So and thinking about what happens when you get it out into the market, or you're thinking of sort of, it's almost like a scenario planning. So it's a step before you're actually doing your product development and design, to have an idea of what it is that you're trying to accomplish, and actually then take the steps to actually go through the disciplines of creating the product. So for instance, if somebody is in fast fashion and they're thinking about that they want to create they want to create a new fashion line, then they may want to think about where is the material coming from, how is it being produced, where is it being produced in other countries, what happens when they bring it into the country that they're in, what happens when it's sold, is there other opportunities for the retailers to do something different with that product. Maybe they could do a program where if the person brings it back in another year or so, they get credit toward another new product. So it's things that you might not necessarily have thought of as you were creating a product, because you're used to thinking of the product in a certain way, but it's considering the whole end to end to include other areas that might give you different opportunities.
Chris, do you have an example as well?
I mean, I think like the flywheel methodology, there's a book that's a pretty short book actually about like the way flywheels work in general. And so inside of like product management, I think how you build a flywheel is actually through building a system understanding of the way that your organization works. And in particular, like it could be the way that you interact with the marketplace. And so I think that's like a really good example. So the idea of like, we will actually build something that gets more users because then we can sell more of their time. And that means we'll get more revenue to be able to, actually Amazon is like a very specific example of that, right? We're going to make it so that we will, sell a bunch of stuff in the most efficient way possible, so we can make more money, so we can invest back into the way that we do our work to make it so that people get things at a cheaper price, they get it faster, and they get more of it, right? And so that's like a very simplistic version of that. But I think flywheels end up being
that's like a flywheel that's a little out of control there.
It is. Well, and so that's the point, right? Is like what we're talking about here is actually about like flywheels are about the fact that like once you get them spinning, it's very hard to get them to stop. Right. And so that could be considered like a value, right, to a business, is to have a moat and a flywheel of some type. But it also means that once you start getting so like out of control, it may mean that you can't necessarily change the way that the business is working based on the fact that like there's so much value or money being generated from it in some way. So I think like flywheels are interesting because what you're doing is you're actually identifying the entire system that's taking place inside of like a marketplace, the way you engage with the marketplace, and then you're isolating certain parts of it to then create something that is constantly kind of reinforcing itself. And so that's an example of where product managers want to focus on reinforcement a lot of the time because they want to build something that is better and better and better. The metrics there end up being the part that I think end up getting you in trouble, right? Like if we're talking about just like, it's about pure revenue in some way, it means that the externalities outside of revenue are kind of ignored. And so that's why like when drawing like a complete system picture, we also talk about like circular economies or the idea of the way that like sustainability works. Like within the machine learning world right now, we're not very advanced when it comes to the way that we manage like accelerator chips. So whether it's GPUs or TPUs or something like that, there's a lot of things that are just like, we're just like wasting time and energy and water on because we're just not as good at managing those types of jobs right now. And I think longer term, when we consider sustainability, I think it's like the best model is actually one that you don't run at all. That's the best model. The second best model is the one that uses the minimum amount of energy and sustainability, like water and other resources, right? Because you're doing cooling and running these chips. And so the question is that it's not, that's why like I think there's like an interesting tension inside the world around like, do we really want these super large models that are running on like, sometimes to train them, you have to use an entire data center over 3 months to train. That's like a lot of energy, right? And so the question is like, do we want those things, or do we want to have smaller, more purpose-built models that are more specific? Like even inside the earbuds that I'm wearing right now, they have a wake word model that's inside of there that has been specifically created for this hardware platform. It's very small, right? It took a lot of work to get there, but those are examples of where like, how should we customize these things? So again, that's another, maybe a different example, but it's like when we talk about sustainability and the way those systems end up working, like we have to think about the externalities. And I think that's, for me, system thinking is bringing the externalities into the map so that we can consider them together.
Systems thinking is definitely an area that does help break down a lot of the silos and encourage a lot of collaboration. What are some of those tips? What are some of those parts, like in I guess I'm more on the tactical side of systems thinking, Patricia, that you see as helpful, as constructive in helping kind of break down those silos and get that communication going?
So I think I consider leverage points as kind of a way of looking at a specific problem and then having a conversation about what that particular problem is. So most of the time, people who are in an organization, they all know that that there's an issue. So it's making sure that you get to that issue immediately, and that you get people talking, right? So, and with a leverage point as well, it could also be like a leverage point doesn't have to be a problem. It could be an opportunity. So getting that sort of cross-disciplinary discussion often leads to the possibility of other things beyond just the product that you're working on. It could be a new product or something like that. So knowing within the organization or within the way that the product is used, where the opportunity is, and then having a method to actually get to that opportunity, that's sort of the leverage points are really the place that you want to be looking.
You mean like kidnapping a puppy or something?
Yeah.
I was going to go with another more politically charged example, but
Yeah.
I went with a simpler one at the moment. Chris, some advice from you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because we sometimes consider these systems outside of the groups that do the work, and maybe that's like the product ops hat again. But the way that we think about what we can do as an organization, sometimes I've been thinking a lot about like this concept of the Overton window recently. And so the Overton window is this idea, usually in political spheres, about what is actually acceptable within political discourse to talk about. And so it's usually like some range between like left and right from an American standpoint, right? And so inside of there's like a range of concepts that we are willing to talk about that are acceptable, that are not too extreme in some way. And so the outside of that is extreme. I think there's something inside of like every organization about what is acceptable to talk about. And, there have been times that I've suggested things to leaders and they're like, no, that's weird. Like, why would we do that type of thing? And again, I am a weird person, but at the same time, like maybe this thing could be helpful in some way. And so I think what we have to consider is also what are we capable of inside of the system to actually make change. So taking the ecosystem analogy, right? Like there are definitely animals that do something called niche construction, which is that they actually form the ecosystem to what they need. So a beaver is a great example of that. They build a dam to be able to create water areas and housing essentially for themselves. And that's called niche construction. And so like every product is actually, when they're new, they're trying to create like a niche that they can exist within. And that is in comparison to the other people that are vying for attention from customers essentially. And so inside of that, like there are some things though that people are not willing to do, right? Like there are some things that certain organizations are absolutely willing to do that others are not willing to do. And maybe a good example of that would be like Uber, right? Like Uber, when they were first getting started, one of their specific goals was to ignore local regulation, right? And that was, they got sued in certain places.
It was their specific goal until Dara took over.
100%. It was specifically a goal of theirs, right? Like, and so in that case, other organizations were not willing to do that, right? And that was a difference, is that there were these like organizational contexts that shifted the window internally for what was possible or not. And so I think that's the other thing I consider or think about here is like, what is possible within your own organization in some way? And I'm still trying to like figure out ways to suss this out. But like a lot of the time it's like, if you come up with a crazy idea, like how does someone react to it? Are they like, well, what do you mean? Like, why would we do this? Or are they like, well, what do you think that would mean if we did that here? Or like, I think there's a bunch of reactions that help you build this like understanding of that spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
I think you're touching on a really important question there. It's not just relevant here, but it's relevant just in so many areas, in one's job. In that, what advice do you have for people understanding what their organization is capable of? How do you help people? Because I know a lot of people they'll just jump the shark and go 10 leagues too far, and that just hurts them. And you don't want to hurt someone who's got good ideas.
One who's got good
feedback.
I'm getting some feedback too. I don't know why.
Let's see. Oh, I found it. All right. I muted you for a moment, Patricia. There. I think it's coming from there. I'm gonna keep you muted for the moment.
Okay, that's fine.
What advice do you have for identifying what those limits are, or so you don't go so far that you burn a bridge early on? Or
I mean, I think the first thing is just like taking the mentality of like experimentation, because I think a lot of the time, like it's okay to be like I think using opportunities where there's a problem for experimentation is interesting. So like, for example, should this actually be a meeting or should it be an email is like the quintessential question for product ops people and product managers. And I mean, every now and then, and this comes actually from chaos engineering, which comes out of like Netflix and the way that they started doing like Chaos Monkey, where they would shut off a random machine in their system and they would see what the impact was on the rest of the system. Because you don't know the emergent impacts until you try it, honestly, because like from a Santa Fe like institute standpoint, like weak emergent behavior is that you know exactly what's going to happen, you can predict. Strong emergent behavior, you usually have no idea what's going to happen. And that's actually one of the most interesting things about like open-ended systems in general is strong emergent behavior. So the problem is that like you don't know what will happen unless you try it. And that this comes also from the standpoint of like the complex part of Cynefin, which is a kind of system to try to build different lenses on types of problems, right? So what I would say is like, if there's a time where someone's not available, right, that runs the meeting, try to run that meeting async and see how it works. And that's like an example of taking advantage of an opportunity. And you could even manufacture this, by the way. You could just pretend that you can't be there. And you could say, let's try this meeting asynchronously and see how it works out this time, right? And so I think also putting like an end date on things when it comes to experiments are really effective when it comes to like org change. But like that's an example of where you're testing something out to see whether it works or not. There's a reason why you're doing it. It's not just something that like, oh, I'm just like, it's a whim, right? And so that's all I'd say is like, I think there's things like that. Like even like, I believe a lot in like randomness in the way that like that changes how we actually decide things. And so, yes, I will sometimes when we're trying to make a decision, I will flip a coin out or roll a dice out of view and recommend the thing that came up. And to me, it starts to either build like because like if I did that in front of other people, like I have a magic 8-ball right here. And so if I did this in front of other people, they would feel really uncomfortable if I was making a decision like this. But if it's just me doing this, I at least start to internalize whether did it matter actually, whether I had a belief about this or not, right? Like those are the crazy things that start to happen inside of organizations that are essentially performance art. If we really want to talk about it, like there was a post that was great about like all meetings are performance art in some way. It just matters what your culture is. And so maybe I'm being too cynical about this, but like I think you should experiment with these things, and you don't always have to like make it visible about why you're experimenting. But doing that ends up, I think, gaining so much information about the reality of what's working inside that organization.
Yeah. I think the always experimenting is definitely a good point. I can tell you, every team I've ever managed, I've always was experimenting on them in some way. Usually doing a few different things, and sometimes causing confusion, but always kind of just testing to see what worked or what was going to break. Or
and that's a great team, right?
But
if you can do that,
also structuring it, but also really structuring it where on my side, like I have a very well defined experiment that I'm trying to do, and I'm trying to see what it is. Just like just like any MVP that I'd be doing, like what's the time span, what's the metric I'm looking for, what's my hypothesis, and that didn't work. And I'll tell you, many of those experiments did not work. But
that's okay. Like that's a problem.
And I say
too.
it knowing that you were on the end of many of them.
Totally. Well, and that's a problem though too, is that like we don't allow for failure, right? Like my favorite quote from Alan Turing is that something cannot be intelligent unless it is also infallible, or it is fallible. And the problem is that to learn, you have to fail. And if you do not have organizations that allow for that, you kind of have to hide the fact that you're experimenting in some cases, right? Yeah. And so I think that's bad, but yeah.
Patricia, I wanted to go back to you. Can you kind of talk a bit about some of the common misconceptions or challenges that you've seen people face when they first try to apply systems thinking to product management?
Yeah, I think that what happens is that it's in many ways it's a theoretical, an abstract way of thinking. And most of the time, people who are doing product management are much more solutions oriented and are not necessarily thinking that the framework is going to give them anything. And so it's sort of like a patience with the step back, right? Sort of a patience to look at it from a holistic standpoint with the faith that you're going to over time start learning how to do it so that you can intuit, right? So and it's we're in a world that is very fast paced, and there is a way in which you have to give it time, and that's a problem, right? So but there's value in it. So I guess it's having the faith that there's value in it. So
like what is like, can you talk about like what are some concrete things that they could be doing? Or I think it's one thing to say have patience. Like how do they
So
maybe
actually do
create
it.
the space for some of the patients, or what are
Right.
some
So
other
it's actually
actual activities?
it's actually doing the process. So you have to do the process. And it's kind of like by doing the process and you find that you get something out of it. But you have to take the step to do the process. And that's why I'm saying you almost have to have faith that it's going to work. So it's really the discipline of taking some time away from your day to take a step back and looking at how is this impacting other parts of the organization? How is the organization affecting the community? How is the community affecting the ecosystem? Right. So it's basically giving yourself the time to do that. And it seems like crazy, but you can come up with some really great ideas by actually not being so intent on or focused on one particular product that you're working on. So it's you wouldn't necessarily come up with some ideas if you are only thinking of that one thing. So that's what I mean by taking a step back.
Are there other misconceptions that you've seen, Chris?
Yeah, I mean, I think like one of the things that I think Patricia is pointing as far as like the practice is that I liken a lot of this to like strategic thinking. So people that are trying to get better at strategic thinking, a lot of the time it's really just confidence in applying strategic models. And so like I have a list of like 10 different strategic frameworks that someone should try. And whenever I've mentored people or created like small peer groups for study around strategic thinking and systems thinking, like flywheels are an example of that type of thing. It's really just like, hey, you're going to do this thing, so let's try to apply it to your situation. And a lot of the time it's very surface level at first, like they're not diving into the specifics or the full mapping of the situation that they're in. And so they gain confidence by like just applying these things. So like Wardley mapping is another one, which is kind of like a systems thinking plus value chain and evolution of like technology type of framework. And so it's an example of where like just even trying that out like makes you take a slightly different perspective. So that practice through the idea of a lot of different frameworks and trying them out in your context and then getting them critiqued ends up being really powerful. And so that's kind of the way that I feel like I have to launch like a course or like a peer group around this type of thing at some point, but it was really effective whenever I've again mentored specific people one-on-one, having them go through like every couple weeks we try a different framework. I critique the way that they think about this. It opens up the way that they start to understand things. And then same thing with like peer groups, like everybody sees the way that they end up trying to apply that framework to their situation, and we understand where it works or doesn't work, right? Because I mean I'm reading through like 7 Powers, which is something that I feel like I should have read a lot longer ago, like and so this is all about kind of like what are the moats or kind of differentiation that business models can have. And like inside of that, if you're not familiar with the terminology and you don't try to apply it, you then not seeing all these things essentially. And so I also like will teach things like Porter's 5 forces or like SWOT just to show how bad they are at actually helping you to make decisions. Because I think SWOT is like, it's one of those things where everybody does them and they always do them in a really poor way, unfortunately. But like, again, you need to have practice with all of these different frameworks, because again, each one of these is a different framing or view or lens on the way that you want to make decisions. And so I think that's really valuable, right? Like you want to just get lots of exposure to those things. And that's what builds confidence and the ability to then think about things like from a system standpoint.
And I also think that the discipline of mental models, which is one of the key elements of systems thinking, I think that doing that on a regular basis actually helps when you're in a multidisciplinary team, because you're thinking about what your thoughts are about whatever the issue is, but then you're thinking about what the other people are thinking about that issue, and then maybe you're thinking about what the other department's thinking about, or maybe you're thinking about how the head of the organization is, right? So the discipline of using mental models really facilitates communication, because a lot of times by thinking of it that way, then you're able to ask the right questions to then either diffuse a situation or get an answer more quickly. So it seems like it's a step back issue, but in reality, it could make it very quick. Like it could help bring things up more quickly.
Yeah, I totally agree.
So I want to kind of wrap up this segment with just one more question, and I'll kind of pose it to both of you. What's one simple step product managers can take to start incorporating systems thinking into their approach in their own product management processes?
So the one that I would take immediately is the mental models that I was just talking about, because I think that is the key component to then get you to think about what the stakeholders are, how the stakeholders are related within the system. So it's an immediate step. And even like, honestly, like when I first started doing it, I wrote it down, because that also kind of helps me. You know, it's just sort of, it's not like, oh, I'm just thinking of it quickly and that's it. It's like the discipline of what would this person think about it? What would that person think about it? Like, so it's a sort of a discipline. Yeah.
Same question to you, Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think drawing lots of maps actually helps an awful lot, and you should throw away most of them. Like Wardley mapping, I think people mistake Wardley mapping when they start getting into it, that this is like the map that we now need to publish and make sure everybody's in agreement with. But like creating lots of maps, and just like, if you look at, again, I think John Culler is like an exemplification of system thinking in product management, and he builds so many different maps about the way things are like connected to each other, that I think like we could all do that more, right? Like every single time that you're starting to write like a PRD or a specification, just like think about like what are the components and the way they link up together. And if you just like visualize that somewhere, you will learn a lot more from the standpoint. And if you do that actually with your cross-functional team, that's even better, right? Because you're not only like building a shared understanding, but like you're actually starting to think about this idea of system thinking. So I think that's like every single time you're starting to think about something new, you should try to map the way that it works. And again, I think about this, like, I think like, yes, it's not linear. Absolutely. It can be circular, but it's more about the graph that you end up creating a lot of the time. And it's like that complexity of like the graph together that ends up helping you actually frame things in that way. Because then what you can decide is like, I've just created this humongous graph. Here's what this product will actually focus on, is this framing right here. We're aware of like the way it interconnects, but like this is what's most important, basically.
Excellent. Yeah, no, I think you've both really, I think you really have both touched on a lot of points of systems thinking, help kind of disambiguate a lot of it, and definitely given some people some real action items that they can carry over to work. You know, tomorrow they can wait till tomorrow. So we're gonna end this segment and go back to the trivia. And for anyone who forgot what the trivia question was, it's who recently said the rise of product owners has done more damage to the credit of product than anything else I can think of in the past 40 years. The rise of product owners has done more damage to the craft of product than anything else I can think of in the past 40 years. Who said it? Chris?
I mean, I think it's a Scrum practitioner. I don't think it's Marty Kagan. I think it's a Scrum practitioner that I can't remember his name right now.
Patricia?
So I think that it's Brian Chesky.
No, he hated product managers.
He just doesn't like product managers.
Just in general.
So this was written up. It was published in Product Predictions of 2024, which I read it. Okay, I read it actually several times by the author, and I'd say it's less about predictions and more about complaints and wishful changes. So the person I'm talking about, I know you're talking about them. And the person I'm talking about, they did. I believe it was posted in the comments earlier. And the person is Marty Kagan. And so my long journey as a product manager, I think there was a point at which product manager and product owner were really more interchangeable. There wasn't a sense of distinction. I think more recently, and I say recently in air quotes here, without lifting both arms.
How many years are we talking about, Jeremy?
Yeah, I know. I'm old. I think when you're looking at more, I guess the past 5 years, 7 years, where it's become more of the split between product manager does this half of the product and product owner does this other half, and it creates this, I find, horrible wall where people kind of then toss it over to you're the more tactical part of the product, you're the more strategic part, and I get people have different strengths. But once you create that wall, I've always felt that man, you're asking for a world of hurt, discomfort.
It's also very uneven. Every place is different about this, right? Like that's the other thing too. Is like it's just like it means something different everywhere.
Like I'd rather segment the product itself than segment the to-do items for a product manager. Like if the product's too big, then you do this part, like this capability of the product, and like if I'm talking Windows, you work on the media player, I'll work on the calculator. Like it's in that maybe crude example. I don't know. What do you guys think? Do you agree with Marty? You can disagree if you want to.
Well, I do like the fact that he calls it the craft of product. So I'm paying attention to those words because I do think that there's such craft in it. So, and I don't know that we always think about it being sort of creative, but also technical at the same time. So I'm focusing on that particular thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think, yeah, I appreciate Marty because he's like trying to change the language that we use in this type of stuff, because I do think that like product ops, there have been plenty of times that I was on stage, I think at like industry during the Q&A section, and people were like, well, what do you think about product owners? And I was like, I don't think that is a title that is worth us actually considering anymore, because it just causes confusion, right? Because it's trying to be from like the Agile and the Scrum world. And then both Agile and Scrum hardcore people will say that there's no such thing as a product owner in either of those manuals, right? And so I don't know. I just think it's this idea. I think it still is hearkening back to the idea that strategy and understanding what is really important is in some ivory tower. And then there's some person that is there to do like the dirty work. And that is very tayloristic. And I don't think that has a place in today's complex world. So that would be the thing that I would argue.
Yeah. All right. Well, you're right.
No offense to the product owners out there, okay? Like, I want you to keep doing the work you're doing, but just try to become product managers. That's what I would say. Like, get that title. You deserve that title. That's what I would argue.
Or work somewhere where they don't make a distinction. You can be a product owner in an agile world, and you're doing product management work. So it's that wall that that wall of you're managing the backlog and I'm managing the creativity. This has been great. Like before I kind of start wrapping up everything, do you guys have any final comments? Anything you want to promote? Any other projects that you're working on? Patricia, I'll go to you first.
Yeah, so I'd like to connect with people on LinkedIn if we can do that. I'd really appreciate that. I'm doing product development and design and consulting in various areas and teaching systems thinking and sustainability. So happy to connect with people about that as well.
Excellent. Yeah, and if you can drop your link, in the comments there, it'll go right to go to all our different wherever we might be streaming this right now.
Okay,
Chris?
thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think like I'm always excited. I try to push the way that we start thinking about product and the way that we end up actually doing our practice. And so I think for me, I would love to hear if like you tried anything, like any of the frameworks that we just talked about. I would love to hear if they were valuable in your context, and if they didn't work out, I want to hear how they didn't work out, because I think that's really important.
Yes,
I think
so I was just going to I'll let you continue. If to Chris's prompt there, post in the comments. Post in the comments what frameworks you've tried, what worked, what didn't work, which ones you hated, which ones you loved. Chris, back to you.
Yeah, and so like, I mean, I think the main thing that I really I think is doing very interesting work right now is the Uncertainty Project, and so definitely subscribe to that. I've
heard of it.
Yeah, it's it's like, I mean, we've been getting like some really great like subscribership, and we've been starting to do more workshops around that. And I did one around like 360 strategies, which is a concept about how I think about the way that we kind of connect all of the different things around strategy and the way that we build a map of that. And so I think that's like something, definitely subscribe to that. And then, I'm always open to helping people, whether it's like, one-on-one, or if you need a little bit of help inside your organization, it's something I'm happy to do. So just like reach out to me.
Yeah, no, Chris is also a mentor in our mentorship program, the Product Mentor, which for anyone listening has been a little bit delayed due to some surgery on my side. So not me. I didn't do surgery. I don't do that in my schedule.
I hope not.
I was the patient. So it's coming back. It's coming back online as soon as I can lift my right arm.
And I want to be clear too, like I can't mentor everybody, but I'm always happy to have a conversation, whether it's async or sync, because I think like, honestly, I learn so much from the people that end up trying this stuff, and your experience as a product practitioner is really interesting to me. So I would just say like, I would just love to hear what you have thought about, and that's super interesting to me. So I'll definitely share out my my LinkedIn.
Excellent. And so I just really want to thank everyone who joined us off camera as well as on camera, or on camera roundtable. Chris Butler from GitHub. Oh, he's wearing the sweatshirt. It must be cold there where you are.
It's incredibly hot. I have to wear this. I'm actually regulated by the GitHub community to make sure that I wear this everywhere I go. So.
All right. Well, it's a good way to lose pounds then, I guess. You can sweat them off. And also want to thank Patricia Rao for at Patrician Design Solutions. And again, back to our off-camera listeners, chat room commenters, what I call our off-camera roundtable. The questions were great. The comments were great. A lot of really awesome insights and stuff there. So I hope everyone really enjoyed learning and discussing product operations and systems thinking as much as I did. I know I have a few new takeaways. I always enjoy when I've got a few new things, few angles that I haven't thought of before. And I hope everyone have some great new insights and action items to tackle as a result. Thank you, everyone, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
This show is brought to you by The Product Mentor, a free program that's making a meaningful difference in the world of product management. With a footprint in over 20 countries, The Product Mentor is where mentors come from esteemed companies you know and trust, like Google, American Express, Etsy, Oracle, and many more. As a mentor, you'll not only contribute to the growth of others, but also be part of an expansive global community. So why wait? Visit theproductmentor.com today to learn more and sign up. It's an opportunity to make a real impact. Are you looking to elevate your brand in the product management space? Partner with The Product Way, the go-to product management channel featuring a variety of shows like TPG Live. With a dedicated and diverse audience of product professionals, from newcomers to C-level execs, your brand will be front and center in conversations that matter. Email us at jhorn, that is JHORN, at theproductguy.com. Again, I want to thank all of our off-camera roundtable attendees for their engagement and for submitting thought-provoking questions and comments throughout the discussion. Your participation is what makes these podcasts truly invaluable for the product management community. Whether you're an engineer, a brand new product manager, a designer, a salesperson, a chief anything officer, or merely product management curious, your perspective, questions, insights, and stories enrich our conversations. We invite you to be part of our on-screen roundtable and engage in these lively discussions. Don't hesitate to reach out by emailing me at jhorn, that is JHORN, at theproductguy.com. There are always more topics to cover, so in the comments below, let me know what you'd like to hear discussed in future episodes. To stay up to date on all things product management, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Thanks again to everybody. I'm looking forward to continuing the conversation on our next TPG Live, where diverse perspectives, continuous learning, and expansive innovation are empowering the product mindset one discussion at a time. Now go and amplify your impact.